Hey guys, welcome back to another video. This is the 20th video in my Python programming series, and today we're going to be talking about objects and a little bit about classes. In the next video we'll go more into depth with classes, talk about creating our own classes and how we can use them, but today we just have to understand what objects are before we can move on to that topic. Okay, so what is an object? Well, I'm sure you've heard of an object before, and when you think of object, you think of something. So usually something you can hold, just something. Pretty much an object is something, right? Something tangible maybe is what you think of. Well, in Python, pretty much everything we do here, a lot of it is objects. So any variable that we create is actually an object. So if I create x and I make it equal to the string, well, if I print out what type this string is, so print and then the type x, well, it's actually an object of the class string. And we've seen the classes before, we may not have understood what they are, but yeah, then if we do y, we set that equal to 23. Now if we print out the type of y, what do you think the class is for this, if you can remember back? Well, it is an integer, so it is an object of the class integer. Now, why is this important? Why do we care about objects? Well, objects have certain attributes. So an attribute is something we can do with the object. So just like we cannot add a string to a number, so we can't add a string to an integer. If I try to do x plus y, and we'll say like z equals that, then we should get an error here. We'll see. Yeah, we get an error because we can't convert int into string implicitly. And just like we have certain methods that we can use on different objects. So for example, if I try to do this, so I try to print out y.count. Now if you remember, count just pretty much counts how many letters are in a string or in a list. Like this, I'm going to count 1. We get an error there as well, and we say the int object, so object like we were talking about, has no attribute called count. But if I change this to x, then it works and it gives us 0, right? Because the string object does have an attribute called count. So these attributes, so all these little dot things here, we had dot find, dot count, dot index, lots of different dots, dot strip, all those things can be used on either strings or on integers. Now I've only shown string ones so far, but there are some ones that we can use on integers. And they have different properties and attributes based on what type of object they are. Same thing if we create another variable, and we'll just call this one boo, and we'll make it equal to true, right? We can't do boo.count. It's not going to work because there's no attribute on the object of a boolean to do that, right? The bool object has no attribute of count. So yeah, I hope you understand that right now. Everything is an object, and based on what type of object it is, it has different attributes. Now those attributes can be simply variables, they can be methods, lots of different things. You don't have to understand that right now. I just wanted to get that out there. So pretty much when we do this y.count or this x.count here, we're actually calling a method on x. So whenever we put a dot and then a name, so we had dot string, dot count, all these dot strip, all those are called methods. So they're built into the class and we can use them on an object of that class. So I hope that makes sense for right now. It's different than if we made a function. So you know how we made the function func maybe, and we printed something to the screen. Now instead of putting, so we'll just print hello whenever we call func. Instead of doing like x.func, that wouldn't work, right? All we did to call the function was we put func like that, right? And if we run the program here, oh, we get an error just because I didn't put anything in here, but we'll get rid of that. If we run the program, we see we get hello, right? So we didn't do a name and then a dot, we just called the function like this. So functions and methods are different. It's just important to understand the difference between a function and a method. And I hope I've kind of explained that a little bit. We'll talk more about the methods in the next video when we do more on classes. Okay, so more about objects here. Pretty much whenever we create any type of variable, we create it as an object, right? So this x object has all these different methods on it, right? So it has dot strip, dot count, dot find. the integer object has some different methods that we can use on it as well. I don't really know a lot of the methods for integers, but if you go on the Python website and you look it up, I'm sure you can find it. Same thing with the Boolean class, right? There's lots of different things on there. So now that we've been talking about classes so much, let's do a brief introduction on what a class really is. So what does a class look like? Well, in the Python documentation, there's a ton of different classes. So every data type has its own class. So for example, a class might look like this. So class, and I'm just going to make this one, I'm going to call it number. And then inside of it, there's a few things. These are the methods that we create inside of the class. So they look just like functions, except they're inside of a class block like this. And they look just like this. And then we'll just do, we don't need anything for there. Define, let's call print, or just call display as this one. So I'm just making this one up here. This method up here is built into Python. I'll talk about what that does in a second. So define display, I'm going to put an X there, and then I'm just going to say print X. And then in here, I'm simply going to do, let's just do self.var is equal to 24. Okay, so I know I just did some things that seem pretty random to you, but pretty much what I did is I just created a class, just so that we can use it as an example to show you how another class works. So let's pretend this number here is actually an integer. Okay, so let's say that this is the integer class in Python. Now this initialization statement, that's what that stands for, underscore underscore init underscore underscore, and this self in the bracket, I actually need to do this in here as well, is mandatory in order to get the method to work. So we do need to have this self inside of the brackets. It always has to be there. Okay, so we've done that. And then let's pretend that's the initialization, right, for the integer class. So when we create this new object of an integer, what actually happens is it sets a variable inside of the class equal to 23. So here, since I have 23, it would make this 23. So let's just put this to 23, like that, okay? And then it has something called methods that can be called on the function. So if I were to do y.display, and then inside of here I need to give it a value, so if I put like 21, then it would display 21 to the screen. I hope that makes sense. That's the method part of the thing. Now when I just create this y variable and I create a new class of number here, or of int, whatever we're saying it is, then it's automatically going to do this init. So I don't have to do y dot underscore underscore init. It's automatically going to do this one whenever we create a new function. So let's just give an example here. Let's do number. So we're just going to make a new variable. So let's call num is equal to number. And then inside of the brackets, we don't have to give it anything because in here, I don't have a parameter. Now, if I had another parameter in here other than self, so for example, I did something like num, then I would have to give a number in this to allow it to work. So let's do that. Self.var is equal to num, and we'll talk about what self.var is in a minute. Okay, so then I've created that. Now if I try to print out num to the screen, we'll see something interesting. So we get main.number object at this location. Now this is a bunch of gibberish, means nothing to me really, other than it's the location in memory on your computer of where this object is stored. So whatever that means to you guys, but yeah, that's the location in memory of where it's stored. And I just wanted you to see that it pretty much is creating an object of the class number. So rather than creating a object of the class int or the class string, we're creating an object of our own class that we've just made in our program called number. Now, what do we want to do here? Well, why don't we try calling a method on our new class? So we use the name, so we'll do num.display, and now we need to give it a parameter in here. So I'm going to do something that may seem kind of confusing to you guys, but just just follow along. I'm going to do num.var in this bracket. And when we run it like this, we get 23. So let's talk about what happened. So pretty much this display method, it takes one parameter of x. This self, just ignore it. It just needs to be in there to make this work. And the parameter that I'm passing it is num.var. Now, up here in this initialization statement, so when I actually ran this little line of code here, it ran this. Now, it created a variable inside of the class number called var. Now, this variable is global inside of this. So it's not fully global, but it's global, and all the functions that are inside of this class can see it. Now, that's because I put a little self and then a period beside the variable. If I had just done var.num like this, you'll see what happens. We actually get an error here because we can't see that variable. So we have to put the self before it like this to make it global, like that. So yeah. I know I've kind of gone quickly today. I just wanted to give you a brief example, hopefully get you guys to understand a little bit about it. In the next video, I'm going to talk more in depth about classes. We're going to create our own classes, and we're going to see some examples of why classes are useful. So that's been my video today on objects and classes. I know it's been kind of all over the place, but if you enjoyed, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you again tomorrow where we'll talk more about classes.